Which of the following is the worst GPU of all time? The RTX 5090, the RX 580, the RX 6500 XT, or the RTX 3050 6GB? This is the question posed in a poll by the Toasty Bros that popped up on my timeline a couple of weeks ago. I have thoughts about each of them, some of which I've been very public about, but I'd argue that none of these GPUs are even close to being the worst of all time. This is subjective, of course, it's all a matter of opinion, but what I really took umbrage with was the fact that the RTX 3050 6GB was the winner of the vote for the WOAT, when I'd argue that in the current insane world of budget graphics cards, it's the sanest choice. First, it must be remarked that the 6GB 3050 is objectively not a good GPU. It's built on 2-generation-old architecture, it's overpriced, it's got too little VRAM, it needs me to mention the VRAM amount to avoid being confused with the superior 8GB version, it's too stingy on PCIE bandwidth, it's not even DLSS 3 compatible for crying out loud. How is anyone supposed to game without frame generation? It might be the cheapest RTX GPU on the new market right now, but you can get better buys on the used market. It might be available without the need for external power, but that only really matters if you're upgrading a particularly shitty pre-built. For the majority of people who watch comparative PC tech videos on YouTube, the 6GB 3050 just isn't the one. However, the title of this video is In Defense of the 3050, so I guess I need to do some defending. At the same price point on the new market right now, there's basically fuck all else worth having. I've tested the Arc A380 before, and wasn't impressed to say the least, so I can't imagine the A310 comes even close to the Geforce. The RX 6400 is weaker, has less VRAM, and won't be getting proper FSR 4.1 until some point in 2027, and if you can find a 6500 XT for a similar price, it has the same limitations and is only slightly faster than the Geforce. Meanwhile, the 3050 is a GTX 1060 with ray tracing, DLSS upscaling and current driver support, and it's available in small form factor friendly versions with no need for external power. None of the alternatives at this price point can compete on every single one of those fronts. To meaningfully beat it on performance, you need to step up to the RX 6600, which is all but discontinued. To get AI-powered upscaling, you'd need to go to the B570, which isn't available worldwide, or the RTX 5050, which TechTube has resoundingly shit upon from a great height. All of these options are probably better value, offering more frames per dollar or euro or pound or whatever, but that doesn't mean much if your budget has a hard cap. And yeah, maybe these small form factor pre-builts are shitty, but that's exactly why they need a better option than whatever Intel HD graphics or GT 710 version they have at the moment. The 6GB 3050 might not be good, but currently it's the best at what it does. To find out just how not good it is, I'm running the MSI low profile version of the card, which I bought brand new back in 2024 and has been sat in a box for most of that time. The test platform is the newly revised 2026 moderately priced gaming PC featuring a Ryzen 5 5500X 3D, 32GB of DDR4, an Asus Prime B550 motherboard, and other various stuff. Yes, I know I'm a couple of weeks late to the party, but IO Interactive's 007 First Light is currently the most interesting thing going on in AAA. I played through the first 90 minutes of the game on the 3050, which defaulted to 1080p at low settings, and the result was mostly acceptable, though there was a tendency for the frame rate to drop into the mid to low 20s at times. The game still manages to look generally pretty good even at these settings, but sometimes Bond's hair does glow unnaturally from certain angles, and draw distance on stuff like shadows isn't all that impressive. During the advanced training session, which I've chosen as my benchmarking run, I saw an average of 33 FPS with lows of 26. Of course, we have DLSS quality upscaling, but unfortunately it's less impactful than I'd like. DLSS doesn't take much from the image, but it also gives next to nothing in terms of performance, and even at DLSS balanced, the average only scrapes 40 FPS. It does, however, keep the percentile lows above 30, so it might be worth using anyway. Yes, I know I'm a month or so late to the party, but Playground Games' Forza Horizon 6 is another one of the most interesting things currently happening in AAA. Unfortunately, I didn't really have time to get into it as much as I'd like to, but thankfully, like its predecessors, Horizon 6 includes a built-in benchmark. The low preset is not the best looking I've ever seen, but it does mean for an average of well over 60 FPS. Stepping up to medium is still capable of running at a healthy 56 FPS on average, but if you want to get back up to 60 plus, you might want to add quality DLSS. RE Requiem is one of my favourites so far this year. Since the release of Village a couple of years back, I'm really starting to enjoy Resident Evil again. However, I'm not here to tell you what to play. Requiem still remains in the charts at the time of writing, so I guess there's going to be some interest among gamers on a budget. Unfortunately, like the last few entries in the series, Requiem is pretty RAM hungry, and the 6GB frame buffer means I'm limited in what settings I can choose. I ended up at the low preset with several other quality settings manually dropped to low or normal, with ray tracing disabled but with hair strands left turned on, and in the opening street scene that saw an average of 45 FPS. This did prove to be pretty changeable, however, and in cutscenes there were moments when it could fall below 30, so perhaps I'm being a bit optimistic over the whole hair strands thing. Famously, allegedly capable of running on a GTX 1060, you might hope that the 6GB 3050 has a shot in Crimson Desert. And you'd be right, if you weren't dead set on achieving 60 FPS. At 1080p low without upscaling, the 3050 can manage around 41 FPS on average. Probably playable, especially if you're using a controller rather than mouse and keyboard, but you might want to use DLSS. Increasing the preset to medium doesn't have all that much impact on performance, but it does sacrifice a solid 30 FPS, in which case DLSS is definitely the best option. The last of the PS5 ports, at least for the time being, Death Stranding 2 is built on the Decima engine we're familiar with from the Horizon series, and so far has run exceptionally well on everything I've tested it with. The 3050 might not be able to generate 60 FPS, as you've probably gathered by now if you didn't skip ahead to this part of the video, but it's a fairly consistent 30-ish at 1080p medium. Still, I'd be inclined to ensure a 30 plus experience with quality DLSS, but if you're a resolution purist on a tight budget, I don't know how that works, but I guess people like that must exist, you can kinda get by without it. Kingdom Come 2 is a fairly lightweight, good-looking title with apparently enough of a fanbase that it's still in the top 100 most played games at the time of writing this script. Sadly, at native 1080p medium, it falls just short of the 60 mark on the 6GB 3050, and while that might be acceptable, adding quality DLSS gets things much closer to it. Every now and again, us YouTubers pick up on a popular indie title that's doing well in the Steam charts, and while it might serve to date this video, I thought that for £6 I might as well give Fatekeeper a try. It's interesting because it's a UE5 game. Yeah, I know, boo. It's a UE5 game with particularly nice graphics, and it has unreasonably high minimum system requirements that look like an error. Well, the bad news is, it might be able to run on a GPU less potent than a 3070, but not that much less. At 1080p medium it averages 43 FPS, but this is with highs in the 50s and 60s and lows in the 20s, as performance varies wildly according to the environment. Quality DLSS helps, but heavy scenes are still going to drop frames all the way from the 60s down to the 30s. Also, you might ask why I didn't go with low settings, and there are two reasons. For one thing, the shadowed areas in low just look a bit weird, and for another, performance is actually worse. Like, a lot worse. Staying on the UE5 train for a moment, Arc Raiders is famously one of the good ones, and is still proving popular on Steam. At 1080p medium with static lighting, i.e. with ray tracing turned off, the average surpasses 60 FPS and lows are around 48. I didn't feel the need to go any further than this, but there's plenty of room to add DLSS or drop settings even further if you'd rather gain more frames. I've chosen a smaller scale map for testing GPUs in Battlefield 6. Large maps with high player counts can put more load on the CPU, and while I don't expect my 5500X 3D to become a bottleneck, I would warn anyone with an older Intel quad-core or a first or second gen Ryzen that they might struggle to hit any high frame rates in Conquest. As it stands though, in this map, the 3050 isn't going to be challenging anything but the worst CPUs from the last decade or so. At low settings, it averages 68 with lows of 52. As most CS2 players will happily sacrifice graphical quality at the altar of the almighty FPS, it doesn't usually need to be benchmarked in a GPU review. However, we're talking about a pretty weak one here, below what some iGPUs are capable of even. That being said, CS2 is still not that demanding even at high settings, and the average of over 160 FPS in Dust 2 Deathmatch is more than enough for an enjoyable experience, if not a sweaty pro gamer one. Are you tired of GTA 5 yet? No, you're not. The classic 2015 version of this game is probably going to fly on the 3050, just like most other games of that era, but the 2025 Enhanced Edition has a few more bells and whistles to throw at you, including ray tracing. The 3050 is supposedly an RTX card, but so far I've mostly had to turn it off in the name of performance. Can it actually do the thing its name suggests it does? Yes. Like so many other titles I've tested, the 6GB frame buffer prevents us from pushing settings too high, but at the high RT preset we're within the memory limit and the average FPS reaches 85. Finally, Mom of War was just announced and looks amazing, but sadly won't be coming to PC anytime soon. Until someone comes up with a PS5 emulator, or Sony does a U-turn, you can console yourself with the next best thing, God of War Ragnarok. It's been a while since I last tested this game, and I'd forgotten how rough it can be on low VRAM cards. In the fairly intensive area of Slarty Bartfast, I saw a 36 FPS average, with lows dropping below 30 at times. With that in mind, a bit of DLSS might help, but I'd say it's not strictly necessary. So, I have to confess, I actually secretly kinda like the 6GB 3050. Yes, it's a bad buy, especially if you have access to a relatively healthy second-hand market and aren't shy about using it. And yes, it's a black mark on Nvidia, a company who, I guess, doesn't really care what you or I or any other gamer thinks about them. However, as time goes by, the pool of cheap, compatible gaming GPUs shrinks ever further. Polaris and Pascal are officially obsolete, and it won't be long before we see the first-gen RDNA and Turing on the driver support chopping block. The 3050 is everything that reviewers say it is. Misleading, overpriced, underpowered, underspecified, but it's far from the worst of all time. In fact, I'd argue that if it were, say, a third cheaper than this, we'd be talking about it as the new 750 Ti. Besides, could be worse. It could have DDR4. Thanks for watching, kindly do the usual YouTube things if you feel so inclined, and I'll see you next time.